All right, three, two, one. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On tonight's show, I have a very special guest, a returning guest. His name is John Hamer. Last week, we talked about some suspicious elements to the Soham child murders, but this week, we're going to talk about a book he published in the early 2012. The title of the book is The Falsification of History, Our Distorted Reality. It's available on Amazon here in the U.S., also in the U.K. He's had excellent reviews for the book, about 40 five-star reviews here in the States and 200 for the UK readers. But it's a very dense book. There's tons of information. It's an excellent book. I recommend it. And we're going to just cover a few topics here in the hour that we have. John, are you there?
I am, William.
Awesome. Thanks again for agreeing to the interview. Congratulations on the book and its reception. I think maybe what we can do is just start, for people who didn't hear last week's show, is talk a little bit about your background and then what inspired you to write this book, The Falsification of History.
Yeah, sure. Well, I spent most of my working life in the corporate world. I was an IT consultant, various jobs in the IT industry, until I was made redundant in about 2001, I believe it was. And I'd sort of always been interested in conspiracy theories, for want of a better word. I hate that term, but I was always that kind of a person. I've always been a bit of a rebel. And so I didn't have a job, so I began researching and writing a little bit, and I wrote one or two articles just for my own benefit, and one or two got published on various websites. And eventually I came to the conclusion that I could stitch all these little articles together and make a nice book out of them. And so I carried on writing and writing and writing. It took me about 3 or 4 years, but eventually I had enough material to fill quite a thick book, which The Falsification of History is. And it just went from there. So I really spent most of my time in the last sort of 18 years just writing and researching and writing. And I've just sent my 5th book to the publishers this very week.
Congrats.
That's called JFK, A Very British Coup, which is a new take on the JFK assassination. Well, it's maybe not that new, but it's certainly different. And I've come at it from a completely different angle, the British angle, if you like. Because I believe it was actually the British Crown that ordered the assassination, and by the British Crown, I don't mean what is commonly known as the British Crown, and that is the monarchy, but the British Crown is the financial empire that envelops the whole world, and I think it was very much a fact that Kennedy really upset those people. Right. So that's what that book is about, and I've just this very morning started on book number 6, which is a companion to the Falsification of History called The Falsification of Science.
Awesome. Well, congratulations on completing the book on JFK. And I look forward to reading that. And if you follow on to this book would be great. But it's interesting you bring him up because there's a significant portion of this book where you talk about so many murders, assassinations here in the U.S. that typically are not discussed, at least in toto, not all together. And so many of them involved the financial world, if not all of them, really, if you talk about Lincoln or JFK.
Well, my 4th book, which is Behind the Curtain, which is even bigger than The Falsification of History. It's 2 volumes, and both of them are bigger than The Falsification of History, so it's quite a sizable thing. And that really comes at it from the angle of that is the financial cartel, if you like, that controls the whole world. You know, not governments. It is the financial cartel. It's the financial cartel that picks governments, because I think was it FDR that said presidents are selected, not elected? And he was absolutely right.
And wasn't it one of the Rothschilds who said, "I don't care who rules"?
Yes.
What was do you know the verbatim quote?
Yeah, if you just give me 1 second, I can get it into my head. It was, give me control of a nation's money, and I care not who makes the laws.
Right. Yes, exactly. And that was what, Baron Rothschild?
Yes.
One of the early ones, right. So you see this theme of the financial elites really distorting the history. And so a lot of the patsies and things like that, even in the States, one thing that I never really considered was Theodore Roosevelt's ascent to power after McKinley was murdered by The Lone Gunman, the same theme.
Yeah,
And
sure.
so, we forget, at least I do, is you don't, one of the great things about the book is you just see American history in a way, you put it all together. There's so much information in the book that, it's really remarkable to see our history and how many attempted assassinations, strange things going on. Wendell Mandell House, or whatever his name was, is involved with Trotsky. So you forget, like, Trotsky came out of here in New York, destroyed Russia. So
correct. I mean, one of the chapters, I think this is one they're probably referring to, is called Unelected Presidents of the US. And there are so many that weren't actually elected, but people don't realize it. That they either took the place of someone, or, they were people like Bush II. He was fraudulently elected, wasn't he, because of the vote rigging. So there are so many different presidents that you wouldn't imagine weren't elected because of assassinations and because of various other things.
Right. Poisonings and strange things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, we have here Jackson took a bullet to the chest and survived, and had a bullet behind his heart, but that was an assassination about him. He said, "Over my dead body will I create a bank of the U.S. run by somebody other than the people," and he was a constant battle. I mean, crazy.
Yeah.
That was one of the interesting aspects. But maybe what we can do is just talk about the real prehistory and how even our origins and the way we look at ancient history is a lot different than really than what we're taught in school. Yeah,
well, I believe so. Obviously, yeah. There's a lot of different elements to it, but I think it all comes back to. I mean, it depends how far you want to go back. I mean, in the book, I go right back to, the dawn of time before humanity, sort of thing. But and funnily enough, the book that I'm writing, that I've started writing this very morning, The Falsification of Science, that is how I've started that one as well. And what I'm covering is how the fact that even things like, I believe, the Big Bang, for example, is just a theory.
Right.
But it's made out as though it's absolute fact.
Right.
If you speak to any scientist or any man in the street for that matter and ask them how the universe came into being, they all quote the Big Bang almost verbatim, as though it's settled science, but it isn't. It's just a theory that has been blown out of all proportion, and people just accept it now as fact. Right. I would guarantee that if you did a poll in the street and you went up to 20 people, I bet a minimum of 19 would say that is how the universe came into being, and it'd probably be 20. But I would say a minimum of 19. But it's not fact, and there are so many other elements to how things started that are not fact, but they're just put there as though they're fact, right. and we just believe it because science says it, so that's it.
Right. You could put the theory of evolution in there; it's still a theory, but people assume that that's the origin of species.
Yeah, and people don't realise how insubstantial a theory it is. I mean, I've had so many people slate me for actually saying that evolution is not a fact. Oh, because the science is settled. Well, no, it isn't. I'm sorry. People think it is because it's just absolutely, it's thrust at us. Every right. TV documentaries, National Geographic, the History Channel, the Smithsonian Channel, all the documentary channels, they all just talk about evolution and make programs about evolution and related topics as though it's a fact. But it's far from settled. And if you look at the other side of the coin, which I would urge everyone to do if they think I'm talking absolute nonsense now, I would urge everybody to just do a quick Google and look at the alternatives to evolution, or should I say the contra-arguments to evolution, because there is so much stuff in there that is not fact, but it's just assumed to be. Right. It's just assumption.
Right. No, it really is. I mean, but here's the thing is that it's part of the falsification where you're taught that at an early age. I think our first studies in evolution were grade school here in the States, so you're getting the indoctrination right away.
Absolutely.
And Darwin's Origin of Species, they never follow on the main title of that book, which is, what is it? The battle the battle for the preservation of the favored races in the battle for survival, or something like that. Like, it really has.
It was very much. Yeah, I mean, Darwin was a eugenicist.
Right.
It's very. evolution was very much based on his eugenics beliefs, and what a lot of people don't realise, and I put this quote in the book actually, is that Darwin actually on his deathbed actually sort of recanted it. He said, I can't remember the exact words, but the quote's in the book. He actually said that he didn't really believe that it was possible that evolution was a fact, or words to that effect. I've sort of paraphrased it, but because I can't remember the exact quote. But so even Darwin wasn't convinced.
Yeah, and if you extrapolate that, you can look in, like Freud was unquestionable at a certain time here in the States. His was science, and now he's been debunked. So there's definitely fashionable science, at different eras or times in human history.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, so, and then, after evolution, obviously, that's what science tells us. That's where we all came from, out of the primordial slime and the soup or whatever they want to call it. The first single-celled creatures appeared, and then step by step over millions of years, billions of years, we turned into, what we see today, the human being. But again, when you look at that in more detail, and when you get genuine scientists who've actually investigated that, you realise that, it's supposed to be done by mutation. But what they don't tell you is that there are no good mutations, or very few good mutations. Most mutations are bad news.
Interesting.
Okay, so it would actually have taken a lot more than billions of years to turn a piece of pond slime into a human being. It's just, the whole thing is just a complete farce from top to bottom.
Yeah, no, it's remarkable. And there's never been a kind like alligator has come out of a hippo's womb, or There's
exactly.
Nobody's ever seen that in human history. There's no recording. Granted, human history is very brief comparatively to the universe, but still, there's nobody in Greece history saying, "Wow, these creatures then morphed into another creature." They've adapted, right?
Yes.
So Galapagos Island, you see the lizards have adapted, but they haven't changed, which is remarkable, right? So they haven't turned into fish.
Oh, yeah, that's incredible. I mean, that's where we have to distinguish, and this is where people don't do this, probably because they're not aware, but we have to distinguish between what's called microevolution and macroevolution. Microevolution is just what you've just described, and that is minor adaptations over time to benefit that creature. For example, I can't think of an example, but I think you get the gist.
Right.
Minor modifications that improve that creature's chance of surviving. Okay, those do take place, and no one in their right mind denies that. But what they do deny is macroevolution, and that is one species turning into another. There is absolutely no record of that at all. And again, Darwin himself said there is no record in the fossils of halfway house creatures.
What there is a record
halfway between one species and another.
Right, but what there is a record of these creatures existing over millennia, right? So they're the same; they don't change, but there's no record.
Exactly.
So I look forward to reading that book too, because So I mean, the natural question from that, well, if we didn't evolve, where did we come from? And I don't answer that question because I can't, and no one can. No one knows where we come from. I mean, obviously, religious people believe that we were created by God. Some people believe that we were created by a higher intelligence, and I'm sort of tending to fall into that category myself. But there is no real answer to it, is there? And the debate will just go on and on for centuries, I suspect. Right, or panspermia, we were seeded from other places in the universe or whatever.
Yeah, this is what I meant by a higher intelligence. Yeah, absolutely.
Right, gotcha. Yeah. But one of the interesting aspects of your book that, I like that section where about how, the Columbus myth is really a falsification of the reality of the new and old worlds.
Yes.
And that, I didn't know anything about this comet of 562 or the brother of King Arthur supposedly, coming to the States. And there's evidence. And there have been archaeological digs that are inexplicable here in the States where they find Hebrew lettering and things that are kind of washed away from, standard school teachings. But maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. Well, the comet that you referred to, I mean, not many people do know. I mean, it's only, I think it's just starting to be accepted now now by mainstream science. And the reason that it was, sorry, I'll start at the beginning. The comet of 562 AD, so almost 1500 years ago, there was a massive comet that hit the Earth, and it left a trail of devastation from the north of Norway in the north, and a diagonal line through Great Britain, across the Atlantic Ocean down into South America, and it left huge swathes of damage, and it killed, well, nobody knows how many people were killed because there were obviously no records kept in those days, but it must have killed thousands, and apparently it made Great Britain uninhabitable for many decades, several decades. And the few survivors, the land was just devastated. It was just turned, a fertile green land that Britain is or was, into mud, basically, and molten rock. And so a lot of the survivors apparently went to France, which is just a short hop across the channel, but some went across to America, to the States, or what would become the States. And one of those, allegedly, was King Arthur's brother. And the reason why King Arthur is not recorded in history as being a fact and only a legend is because of religion, basically. Because in the Christian religion, it was against the teachings, against the scriptures, to say that rocks could fall from the sky. Oh. So for something like 1400 years, up until the middle of the 19th century, it was forbidden to actually discuss anything about rocks falling from the sky. So hence there was never any record of the comet, and all the other bits of history surrounding that were erased, were popped down the memory hole, as it says in 1984. Right. King Arthur's brother came to America, apparently. He settled in Kentucky, and he lived there for about 20 years, I believe. I might have got that figure wrong, so don't quote me on it. But and it's believed that his descendants, obviously he didn't go on his own, he took a party of people with him, and it's believed that his descendants formed the Mohican Indian tribe, and they were the descendants of King Arthur's brother.
Remarkable, yeah. Wasn't there some writing that was similar to Welsh writing that indicated?
Yes. Right. Well, King Arthur was actually a Welsh king. He lived in the area now known as Wales. I mean, I think it was then as well, actually, but I can't remember the actual date when Wales became a separate entity. But so the Welsh at that time used an alphabet called Coelbren, spelled Coelbren, and there's a lot of evidence for that still in archaeological findings in Wales, and also that exact same alphabet was found in Kentucky. And there's an American guy whose name escapes me, but again, it's in the book. And he did a lot of research, and his research actually matched up with the British researchers who found all this stuff out. And they met and compared notes, and everything matched and hooked up together. So it really, it constituted proof that this was the case. Yeah. And the guy is the chairman or the founder of the Kentucky Historical Association, something like that, but I can't remember his name, I'm sorry.
They have here in the States, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Kennewick Man, who looked vaguely kind of European, and it still is a huge issue. It happened in Washington where they found this very well preserved human being in mud that looked European.
Really?
And look up the Kennewick Man if you find it. And this is one of many stories of the States where they find remnants of kind of civilizations that don't fit into present day understandings. But the Kennewick Man, they actually suppressed it. A lot of the Native American, indigenous Americans didn't want to acknowledge him because he didn't look like the present day indigenous people.
Right. And makes sense.
And there's also been remnants of the Ainu people who were way back, like ancient 2,000-3,000 years, that existed in Japan all the way through Alaska, all the way through the Northwest, bearded, and they still have remnants that are still around, this kind of strange tribal class. So there's been stories of these rituals that are vaguely Christian that explorers found. So there's all kinds of very level things going on in the States before Columbus showed up. And you talked about the Vikings discovering Vinland, I think they called it. So it's
Yeah. So to answer the original question or the original point, yeah, Columbus did not discover America. In fact, he never set foot on the American mainland. Columbus. I think he only reached was it Puerto Rico and the West Indies? Yeah. He never actually set foot on the American mainland, Columbus.
Good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you made that point. Yeah, it wasn't really discovery. It was new lands for Spain. New Spain They called it New Spain until they had their colonial insurrection.
Of course, yeah.
And
it was political, of course, and that's why history gets falsified for political reasons, and that's the theme that runs constantly through the book. It's political expediency. That's why history is falsified.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then you talk about these other kind of false flag events. There were so many of them. Like kind of the modern day man hears about, the Reichstag fire, 9/11, but there's been these types of strategic false flag events going all the way back to the gunpowder plot and all these things, really in kind of post-medieval history.
Yeah, I mean, just about every sort of major incident you can think about throughout history. I'm not saying all of them, but I would say many of them are, what we refer to as false flags. Again, it's all about political expediency. Do you want me to explain for the benefit of the listeners, those who might not understand what a false flag is? Or?
Absolutely. Why don't you go into that and talk about some of the things that happened there in the UK? Trying to, demonize Catholics. Like even today, when you watch V for Vendetta, it's really about the gunpowder plot. But your interpretation of that is different than the common understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, okay. The false flag, for those who have not come across the term before or don't understand what it means, it's an operation that takes place usually by a government, not always, but usually by a government. That's designed to fool the victims into believing that it was carried out by totally different entities. So, for example, a good example of a false flag would be there's lots of good examples of false flags, but 9/11, typical one. 9/11 was a false flag because we were told it was carried out by 19 Muslims with box cutters who broke the U.S. security service, U.S. security net that covers the entire country and is probably the most secure airspace in the world. We were told that it was those planes were hijacked by those people, but in actual fact, it was done by entities other than that. But we're told that it was those people, so that they could demonize them, and so that it would enable public opinion to be on the side of invading Iraq a couple of years afterwards. Right. So, that's an example of a false flag. It's carried out by an entity. It's said to be carried out by an entity other than those that have actually done it. And it originated with the pirate flags, because pirate ships used to fly the old skull and crossbones. And when they saw a victim, a ship that they were going to attack, they would pull down the skull and crossbones and they would put up another country's flag so that they didn't know that they were pirates, and they would blame that country. It's, and these things have gone on throughout history.
Yeah, very true. And can you talk about the gunpowder plot and why that was involved, kind of an intelligence agent at that time, and why they wanted to demonize the Catholics?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Do American audiences know what the gunpowder plot is?
Well, like I said, I think they're familiar with Guy Fawkes. They see the Guy Fawkes mask. Yeah. Supposedly this guy, who was a Catholic sympathizer, took a bunch of gunpowder and we're going to blow up the British Parliament.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, okay.
So they're generally familiar, yeah.
That was in 1605. What had happened just prior to that? Queen Elizabeth I had just died a couple of years before, and her nephew, James I, who was the son of Mary Queen of Scots, a famous historical figure who most people have heard of, he ascended to the throne. Now Mary Queen of Scots was a Catholic, and so was he. He was a Catholic, and at that time, England was totally Protestant. And again, we have to be aware of the historical background to all that, because it was England between the mid-16th century, the mid-1500s, and the mid-1700s, or the early 1700s, went through a series of what are called through a schism, if you like, where the country was really divided right down the middle. You're either Protestant or you're Catholic. Catholics were the minority, Protestants were the majority. But the power seemed to pass from one hand to the other, and then every time the dominant religion was in power, they would persecute the other one. So this was going on for a couple of 100 years, or 150 to 200 years. This constant persecution and massacres of people who just happened to support the wrong religion. Okay, so the majority of the country were Protestant at the time, 1605 we're talking about, and James the First was Catholic. Now, although he was Catholic, he purported to be a Protestant, right? And what the government wanted to do was to demonize Catholics to get people on the side of James, okay, because he was a Protestant to all intents and purposes, although being brought up Catholic, but the country thought of him as a Catholic, and the government wanted James to be accepted by the public. So I believe what happened is, not just my belief, I mean other researchers as well. I don't claim that it's all my work. Again, this is a false flag event to demonize Catholics, whereby a group of men, including Guy Fawkes and several others, about 5 or 6 others, were enticed into allegedly trying to blow up the Houses of Parliament with barrels of gunpowder, as you say. And unfortunately, it was a setup from the beginning. The government knew exactly what was going on because they'd instigated the plot unknown to the plotters. They were just given the wherewithal and the tools to do it. And then, of course, they were caught in the act. And that completely, shall we say, it made the Catholics look bad. So it was to boost the Protestant religion and to make James appear like a hero because, he and his government had thwarted this nasty Catholic plot, and all these bad Catholics had to be hung, drawn and quartered, the ones that survived. And, that's what it was all about, really. So, again, it's all about political expediency.
Right. And I think you said that it was, James's intelligence aide, Robert Cecil, was kind of the brain behind it?
It was,
gotcha.
Yeah.
And so that was something that solidified James, and then he went on to write the King James Bible, a book on witchcraft. Yeah, so very.
Yeah, and obviously James was a Freemason as well, which I wrote I don't think it's in the book, but I wrote a piece afterwards about how the King James Bible, which was published in 1611, was like a Freemasonic Bible.
Interesting.
It was written by James, and it's full of Freemasonic references, and even the original Bible, the original printing of the Bible, had Freemasonic handshakes in the margins and things like that, and Freemasonic emblemism.
And that's something that kind of is a strong strain running through, the so-called House of Windsor.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know. Was James part of the Saxe-Coburg-Gotha? I don't think he was, right?
No, James was a Stuart.
Stuart, gotcha, okay. But still, I would say that I guess the royalty there in England has a strong strain of Freemasonry.
Yeah, I mean, they run it, basically. The current head of Freemasonry worldwide is the Duke of Kent, which I think is the Queen's cousin or second cousin or something. So, they're up to their eyes in it, without a doubt.
There's another false flag you talk about, Jack the Ripper, which is actually a cover story for another Freemasonic thing that author Alan Moore covered, both the gunpowder plot and the Ripper case. And Crowley came up in your book, so as somebody who is kind of semi-biographer of Crowley, it made me stand up. But I don't know if you know, but there is a sequence of Crowley. There was a woman by the name of Betty May who was at Crowley's magical house, and Crowley took out the so-called, you mentioned the letters, but he had these ties that he said belonged to the person who committed the Ripper murders. So Crowley,
really?
So I'll send you that
Yeah, please, that'd be good.
It's very interesting. But so there is a tie. You said he lost the letters, but maybe that would be an interesting story about how these false stories are made to cover up the reality of what's underneath the surface.
Exactly. I keep using the phrase, but yeah, it's all political expediency, and it's about the people at the top constantly furthering their agenda and moving things forward and hiding that fact, and that's really what it's all about.
So maybe you can explain that, like most people I think today believe the Ripper was a independent murderer who was interested in hurting women, but your analysis is much different.
It is. It's quite a convoluted story, so I'll do my best to keep it as brief as I can. It started off, obviously the Ripper murders took place in 1888 in London, and they only lasted about 3 months or something like that. So it wasn't that it went on for years and years and years. It was just 3 months. And how it all began was that the grandson of Queen Victoria, who was on the throne at the time, and he was the son of her eldest son. He was the eldest son of her eldest son. So eventually, he would have become king, and he was called Prince Eddie. He was called Prince Edward, but everybody called him Eddie. So he was born I believe because of inbreeding in the royal family, which is rife. He was born slightly subnormal mentally, and they tried to, shall we say, shield him from the general public. So although people were aware at the time that he was around, he wasn't really involved in society and that kind of thing. But so they tried to find things for him to do to keep him out of harm's way, or to keep him away from the general public. So they hired a guy called, oh my goodness,
Sickert?
So yes, Walter Sickert, who was an artist, a famous artist at the time, to sort of mentor him and give him painting lessons, and generally just sort of be his companion, if you like, and look after him. And this he did, but he also introduced him to the more sort of sleazy side of London, prostitution and all that kind of thing. And Eddie ended up visiting a male brothel, and there was all sorts of things went on. So again, the royal family were trying to hush all this up, and Walter Sickert actually employed as the maid of some kind, a lady by the name of Annie Crook, who was just a young girl at the time, and Eddie fell in love with her and married her clandestinely. Okay, nobody knew about it, and to boot, she was a Catholic. That old phrase again, because again, for the benefit of people who don't know this, but Catholics, but the British royal family is not allowed to marry Catholics, or shall we say, you cannot ascend to the throne as a Catholic. Even to this day, you've got to be Protestant. I think that may have changed just lately. I'm not sure. So Eddie had gone out and surreptitiously married this common working girl who was not only that was a Catholic, but she was also expecting his child as well. So. You'll have to forgive me. I'm just trying to remember the exact sequence of events. It's
basically the royal family wanted to cover it up, so they sent out these guys. One of them, who was a sophisticated doctor, and basically hunted down her and a bunch of other women, and they made it Masonic.
And the reason that they did that, right, was because the girl, Annie Crook and her friends, she had a few friends, and they actually, because Eddie and her were separated, so Annie Crook was stupid enough to make a threat to the royal family, and that threat was that she would blow the whole thing wide open publicly unless she got her demands. Okay, so basically she was blackmailing the royal family. So, as you say, what happened next was that the royal family, through the Masonic connections, through the Masonic lodge that they're all part of, which is connected to one of the palaces in London, decided to make an example of them. So it was a Masonic ritual that they went through, where they hunted and killed these 5 girls, and all these 5 girls that were killed were Annie Crook's friends. Right. And they did it. The way that they were all killed was very Masonic. That is, the chests were slit. I'm sorry if this sounds a bit gory for some people, so please switch off if you don't want to hear the rest of it. But they slit them from groin to chin, opened up the chest cavity, removed the organs, laid them about in a ritualized manner around the body and through the intestines over the left shoulder. And apparently that was exactly how someone called Hiram Abiff was murdered in Masonic legend in Solomon's Temple, and which is like the very basics of Freemasonry.
Right.
So we know that it was a Freemasonic plot. There's no question about that. But of course that will get covered up because the powers that be don't want you to know stuff like that.
So it's a message to the other Masons. They know exactly what's going on. The public doesn't know. And then there's a fake story. So it's a kind of a false flag. Everything's covered up. Eddie's doesn't have a child to the throne. Yeah, so. Yeah,
and the upshot of it was that Eddie was locked away, and the public was told that he was dead, that he died of pneumonia or something. I can't remember exactly what, but in fact, he was locked away in a castle in Scotland. And as part of that deal, it was actually the Queen's mother, the current Queen's mother's father, who owned that castle, and part of the deal for Eddie being locked away there and hidden away there was that his daughter, who was Elizabeth Bow-Leon, and became the Queen Mother, our Queen's mother, would marry into the royal family, would marry the heir to the throne, and that's exactly what happened.
Fascinating. Yeah, and there's been other covers up with the royal family. I mean, if you want to get into Princess Diana's death, that's another strange, rictualized, false flag, bunch of lies. Bunch of people died around her death too.
Yeah. But I always think Princess Diana, killing of Princess Diana, other than the method that was used to actually dispose of her, it's very similar to JFK actually, because she upset so many different factions. She upset so many different powerful entities. It was just incredible, and that's exactly what happened with JFK. Of course, I mean, right. he got on the wrong side of so many different people.
Everybody wanted him dead.
Because
he didn't have any allies.
He was his own man, and he wasn't going to be bullied into being a president who took orders from his handlers,
CIA, Defense Department, all that stuff. Yeah, I mean it's interesting. He died on the same day Huxley died, and C.S. Lewis, November 27, 1963. So I mean, the thing is you cover so many stories of these fake history that once you're done with the book, it's just like our history is just like what Napoleon said. It's bunk. We're taught a fake view of reality, a cover story after cover story after cover story.
Yep, and that phrase again, political expediency. That's what it's all about. If you just think that, and it's all about agendas, and it's all about the same agenda that's been going on for hundreds of years, that is constantly being moved forward till we get, I believe, what will happen eventually, or what they're trying to make it happen eventually. We'll live in a complete totalitarian state, and that's what we're moving to. With things like the EU, that is a completely totalitarian organisation. It's the leadership of the EU is totally unelected. All the members of the European Parliament are elected, but the actual hierarchy, the council that governs it, totally unelected. It's modelled on the Soviet Politburo.
Wow. It's incredible. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's incredible. I mean, you can see that's why the UK wants Brexit, is really about self-determination, just at a basic level.
Of course it is. Yeah. But so many people are brainwashed by, all these so-called Remainers, in inverted commas, in quote marks. These people are brainwashed into believing that the world's going to end if if we leave the EU, and it's just absolutely, it's incredible what these
incredible.
people believe. I mean,
well, when you think about it, you're part of an experiment of the EU that's not very old, and the UK has governed itself for hundreds of years. So it's pretty remarkable that people are afraid to go back towards self-government. Whatever. That's a head scratcher for me.
We're just absolutely saturated with all this what I call fear porn, and that is all this fear mongering. Like I say, the world's going to end. Not quite as bad as that. That's an exaggeration. But they say that our economy will collapse. We won't have any markets to all our exports will fail. The country will be isolated. Blah blah blah. It's all this massive just hype and fear, and it's all coming from the establishment as well, from entities like the BBC, which is just the propaganda arm of the British government, the government itself, obviously from Europe. There's a lot of slush being thrown around from Europe itself, and of course they control the airwaves, they control the presses, so it's so difficult to actually divest yourself from it. And if the people who wanted to leave the EU had as big a voice as the people who want to remain, it'd easily be a case of that's it, guys, we're going.
We're out of here. But I mean, do you feel like the British public was sold a line that was propaganda just to get into the EU? That was supposedly going to be this great work of freedom, no war, and now you just kind of have open borders and chaos and a lot of problems.
Yeah, it's just, like I say, it's part of the ongoing agenda, and that agenda, that the ultimate aim of that agenda is a world totalitarian government, a one world government, completely under the control of a tiny elite few sat at the top.
Yeah, it's remarkable. I mean, you include a section on the Georgia Guidestones, this whole... And that ideology is right there. We're going to minimize.
They tell us what they're doing, but people don't believe it still. Again, that's covered in the book, the Georgia Guidestones. And anyone who's not heard of that phrase, the Georgia Guidestones, I would urge them to Google it, because it's incredible what it actually states on these stones. It's like a modern day Stonehenge in America, and it actually lays out the guidelines for this what's come to be known as the New World Order, or this totalitarian order that is coming, or that they hope is coming.
Yeah, and somebody who created it was lovingly created with all kinds of astrological coordinates tied into it. It's made out of granite. And I mean, I think if I remember, the person who paid for it used a Rosicrucian name, or like a cover name, right? R.C. Christian.
R.C. Christian, right. Yeah, absolutely, that's the guy.
Or supposedly, I mean, the front probably wasn't. I mean, it's probably very convenient that it was just one person.
Yeah, of course. No, it was obviously done by by the elite cabal who rule over us with a rod of iron, but remain unseen in the background, without a doubt. Yeah.
Is there? I mean, we're here at the 45-minute mark. It's passed fast. I mean, we've covered some territory. Is there anything else that you would like to cover in regards to your book, or do you want to re-mention this JFK book, or anything that we missed?
I can't think of it. There's so many things in Falsification of History. It's difficult to know which one to pick out of so many. Book, I'll just mention the JFK book again briefly, if I may. As I say, it's just gone to the publishers this week, and I should get the first draft back next week. It'll probably be available next month, I guess, so sometime in April. I'll obviously let you know, William. But as I said before, it's really about, it's coming from the angle of course, we know that JFK upset so many different factions, the mafia, the CIA, the FBI, you name it, pro-Cuban activists, anti-Cuban activists. Johnson, yes, Johnson, of course, he was a big factor in it. But when you follow all those little pyramids, up to the apex of all those pyramids, there is one entity that stands out, and that is the British Crown. Because, again, this may come as a surprise to some people, or even a shock. Or even people may think I'm talking nonsense, and that's obviously their prerogative. But the British Crown still controls the United States. Okay. The War of Independence was a sham. Yeah. It's provable. It's not. It's not. It's just not just mere speculation on my part. So I believe that, and again, that's something to Google. If people, if that's new information to people, then please, by all means, do look that up, and please prove to yourself that I'm not going insane.
Well, I look forward to your points in your book to prove that point. I think that would be interesting. Okay. There's definitely a very strong influence on the United States from the UK, no question. From the top, from the royalty, not just culturally.
Yeah. Well, in the book I talk about a little bit about the City of London, and by the City of London I don't mean London the city. There is a square mile area in the centre of London called the City, and that is a separate state, just like
the Vatican,
Washington DC, just like the Vatican. It has its own laws, it has its own police force, it has its own economy even. It's just, people don't know because it's not widely publicised for obvious reasons, but that square mile in the City of London, which by the way houses the head offices of something like 270 banks, including US banks. People may think the head offices of US banks are in Wall Street. No, I'm sorry. The head offices of a lot of them are actually in the City of London. It is the world financial empire, and from there it controls the Bank of International Settlements, the World Bank, and every central bank in the world.
They still reference the LIBOR rate, the London Interbank Offering Rate is still
exactly.
All banks in the world reference that. Yeah.
Indeed, and like I say, it's the financial capital of the world.
This is true, and the book is JFK: A Very British Coup. This book that we discussed, and briefly, it's such a great book. There's a lot of information there. I highly recommend people get it. It's definitely worth the money. The Falsification of History, Our Distorted Reality. John Hamer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, William. It's been my pleasure.
All right. Have a good one. All right.